The chapter-approved Grand Tournament Pack is an excellent resource for any Warhammer 40,000 player. Even if you'll never play a competitive event in your life, it provides an ongoing, constantly updated set of missions that are diverse, balanced, and a ton of fun to play. While I know the core book does have missions, they're going to become older and older as the game progresses, whereas the Grand Tournament Pack will be continuously updated, and even if you are playing very casually, it's always nice to have fun, up-to-date, evolving, and balanced rules. Having said that, we're extremely excited to have received the 2021 copy of the Grand Tournament Pack, and we want to discuss some of the biggest changes in it today. Specifically, we're going to go over all of the new secondaries, the ways the old ones have changed, and what we're going to be looking at to the future. Let's take a look. Alright, first off we have Battlefield Supremacy. This is the category that's all about being in different parts of the battlefield, positioning yourself, things like that. And right off the bat we have, of course, the classic Engage in All Fronts. This secondary saw no changes, as is shown by the fact that it actually keeps the same name. Any secondaries that were changed, even minorly, received a brand new name. Now, personally, I think this makes it a bit confusing, but for the purposes of this video, it's easy to know if it has the same name, it's going to be exactly the same as it was. Engage on all fronts is still, if you have at the end of your turn a unit in 3 table quarters, more than 6 inches from the center, you get 2 victory points. And if you have a unit in all 4 table quarters, more than 6 inches from the center, you get 3 victory points. Nice and easy. It's a classic secondary, and they did not add any caveats to exclude aircraft, which is something I was curious to see if they would do. Next off, we have Behind Enemy Lines. This is the secondary formerly known as Line Breaker. What they've done here is the beginning of a few changes that we're going to see throughout many of these secondaries. Line Breaker before was essentially 4 points at the end of your turn if you had 2 units inside of the enemy deployment zone. Now this was often very difficult to get. You could often get 1 unit but not necessarily a second unit, and they've gone ahead and added these gradations of points where you don't have to go all out in order to get the points. The way it works now is if you have a single unit inside of the enemy deployment zone, you get 2 points at the end of your turn. And if you have 2 units within the enemy deployment zone, you once again get 4 points. So again, just making it a bit easier to score that. And this does exclude aircraft, which existed before, but it's still important to note that has been kept. The next secondary is one that's a personal favorite on the channel, and we try to take it every chance we get. Now it has only gotten better. This is called Stranglehold, formerly known as Domination. And the way it works now is essentially as long as you hold 3 or more objectives, and you hold more objectives than your opponent, you score 3 points at the end of your turn. Now this is interesting because Domination formerly would let you actually go ahead and take three objectives on a 5 objective mission and to score those points. You had to not hold 3 points or more, but hold more than half. So for missions with 5 objectives, this was easy. We would just hold 3 points, and you would essentially hold 2 in the back, try to hold the 1 in the middle, score your points. Nowadays, though, it's expanded to work much better on these 6 objective missions, where you have 2 in your deployment zone, 2 in your opponents, and 2 in the middle. Domination before was extremely difficult to get because you would have to, of course, hold 4 objectives. Now, only having to hold 3+, you can now go for the 2 in the back, 1 in the middle, and attempt to remove your opponent off of the other one by shooting them or what have you. It's really big because it gives you that extra flexibility and honestly takes one of the most powerful secondaries and just ups it and makes it more flexible and more applicable to more missions. Next up, we have the No Mercy, No Respite category, which is all about destroying your enemy, as the name suggests. Let's take a look. First off, we have No Prisoners, which was formerly Thin Their Ranks. This is one that's all about just killing lots of bodies, getting points for that, and then getting some points for killing big things like tanks and monsters. The way it works now is you get a tally, for every single wound you do to a non-monster, non-vehicle thing, right? And this is very similar to the way it worked before, except that before it was every single model killed. This meant that things like Primaris, things like Death Guard, any 2 wound infantry that are semi-elite were only worth 1 point. And so they got away with this because this was essentially only usable against things that had a horde and a few big tanks, because you also get a single tally, or you get effectively 10 tally points for every monster or tank that you kill. And And so this is a much more powerful secondary than it was before, much more punishing for things like Space Marines, things like Death Guard, and I think this is a good change. Grind them down, another classic secondary. This is simply kill more units than your opponent during the battle round, and you get 3 victory points. Not an easy one to score necessarily. This is exactly the same as the name suggests, no changes to there. I'll be sad to see the name change on this next one. This used to be While We Stand We Fight, and now it's simply called To the Last. Equally heroic, I suppose, but I really like that last name. The only real change to this one is in the way we score with splitting units. So let's talk about it. First of all, this secondary is scored by picking your 3 highest point cost units, not models, and selecting them. If they survive to the end of the game, you get 5 points for every one of these units that survive. That used to be where this secondary ended. Now they've added a caveat to say if you have a unit that splits, you might combat squad, for example, and only half of that squad survives, this one combat squad gets killed, you only score 3 points for the remaining half. It used to be extremely punishing because you could take these units and split them up in any number of ways, and unless your opponent was able to kill every single one from both or all 3 of the units, they wouldn't actually remove the points from you. So it was very, very punishing, a little abusive, and so I think this is a smart change to say, okay, you can still do that, but you're not going to get as many points out of it. The next category we have is Shadow Operations. Shadow Operations is all about sneaky moves and being in key positions and extracting data. Let's take a look at the changes to that. First off, we have Raise the Banners High. This one is exactly the same as it was. I really like this secondary. I think it's very well balanced. You have to be very strategic with it. If you're not familiar with Raise the Banners, as we often call it, the way it works is during your move phase, you can select any infantry, it even could be a character, that's on an objective while there's no enemy units on that objective. They can then raise the banner, and at the end of the turn, you have a banner marker on the objective. Now, at the end of each of your command phases, as well as the end of the game, you score a victory point for each banner that you have raised. So it's really powerful because you can score it late game after raising even last turn banners, which is really, really powerful. And often you can be scoring a minimum of 10 if you're kind of hanging in back of your deployment zone, raising and protecting those banners. So cool secondary, glad to see it didn't change. Next up, we have Investigate Signal, which used to be Investigate Sites. This is a really difficult secondary that appears to only have gotten harder from what I can tell. The way this works is, it at first sounds really powerful. You get 3 points for performing an action within 6 inches of the center of the board. However, you cannot do this action if there are any enemy units within that bubble at the middle of the board, excluding aircraft. So that makes it really difficult to begin. It does complete at the end of your turn, so your opponent doesn't have much chance to respond. However, the added stipulation that they put here is that you, at the end of your turn when you go to score it, still cannot have any enemy models within 6 inches of the center. So this means that it's very possible for your opponent to pull models in via combat and do weird, strange things, even with like Necrons reanimating into the center. So this already difficult and not popular secondary at all only became worse. So perhaps I'm missing something, but this one seems to be a complete miss. I don't know when you're going to be using this. Next up, we have an update to one of my personal favorite secondaries that's been redone very much in the spirit of the changes that we've already seen, wherein it becomes much more of a gradation in order to score this. This is, of course, Deploy Scramblers, which is now called Retrieve Octarius Data, which is sort of where this story seems to be evolving at the moment. And the way this works now is you perform this action, this retrieving data action, in a table quarter, and you must be more than 6 inches inside of this table quarter for it to score. You can do this with any infantry, but not characters, and it completes at the end of your turn. Now, it used to be you would have to do this in your deployment zone, in the middle of the battle field, and also in your enemy's deployment zone. If you did all 3 of those, it would give you a max at 10 points, just flat. If you didn't do all 3, you would get 0. Now, of course, we've added gradations to this. If you have done this 2 times, so in 2 table quarters, you're going to get 4 victory points. If you've done it in 3 table quarters, you're going to get 8 victory points. And if you've done this in all 4 table quarters, you're going to get 12 victory points. And so much kinder. Obviously, doing a fourth scrambler, as you will, is more work, but it actually gets you more points than scramblers would before when maxing out. And if you're only able to get 1 or 2 scramblers, you're going to be punished much less with this new updated Retrieve Octarius data. So I think it's an interesting change. For me, this is going to be one of the ones that impacts the way I play the most, but it is interesting. It also has some interesting implications on deployment zone, right? Previously, scramblers was based off of deployment zones, and so those table quarters, getting that last scrambler was very difficult if it was a small deployment zone like search and destroy. Now we have, you're all using nothing but table quarters, but generally 3 of them are going to be pretty darn feasible. So I think overall this makes for a much easier secondary. That's going to be a lot of fun to play. Deploy Teleport Homers. This is one that can seem good on paper, but it can often be difficult to score. The way this works is you can begin to perform an action if you're an infantry or biker unit that is wholly within 12 inches of your opponent's deployment zone. And then if you do that, you get 2 victory points at the end of your next command phase. You see where it becomes difficult, right? You have to start it during your turn. You have to survive all the way until the following turn in order to score it. What they've done here is if you have a unit that is wholly within 12 of your opponent's deployment zone, you are going to be getting 2 points. Now, if you are entirely within the deployment zone, not just near it, you're going to get 4 points. So perhaps more interesting, but it's still, I think, it's easier to score the 2 points, right? Which means you can actually be looking at 10 points on a secondary, which isn't terrible as sort of a baseline. But I think this one remains to be seen how feasible it is and how often people end up taking it. Now let's take a look at the Purge the Enemy category. First off, we have Assassination, which is very similar to the way it was. If you kill an enemy character, you get 3 victory points. Easy peasy. One caveat now is if you kill the enemy warlord, you get 1 additional victory point. So it's a secondary that was more or less working for us, and adding that a little bit more of an incentive to score that extra victory point against the warlord. It's a nice change. I like it. Next up, we have Titan Hunter. This is one of the secondaries that is extremely punishing in the core book, becomes more lenient in the Grand Tournament pack, and now we've updated it once again to be a bit more lenient. These were all punishing towards knight players primarily. This is all about killing titanic things, right? The way it works now is if you kill 1 titanic enemy unit, you're going to be getting 4 victory points. If you kill 2 of them, you're going to be getting 9 victory points. And if you kill 3 titanic, you're going to be getting 15 victory points. And so it rewards you a lot less for killing just that first Titanic, that first knight unit, honestly, and just kind of builds up in a more gradual fashion. Still quite punishing for knight players, I would say. Having a 15 victory point secondary for basically doing the thing that they already need to do is a little harsh, but I also understand where they're coming from on this. Last up in this category, we have Bring It Down. This is, of course, points for killing monsters and vehicles. And as it was already updated in a previous FAQ, it remains the same. You gain 1 victory point for every monster that you kill that has 10 or less wounds. You get 2 victory points for every monster or vehicle that has 11 to 19 wounds. And you get 3 victory points for every monster or vehicle that has 20 or more wounds that you kill. Nice secondary. Once again, I think it's working pretty well for us. It hits that sweet spot of not punishing small vehicle builds that have lots of them, and not overtly punishing big vehicles. In fact, I think right now, if you have a mid-range vehicle list, this is not the easiest one for people to take, especially with the improvements to some of the other killing secondaries. So some interesting stuff happening there, I think. Welcome to the Warpcraft section of the secondaries. These are naturally all about being psychers and killing psychers. So let's take a look. First off, we have Abhor the Witch. This one is another secondary that has already been updated in a previous FAQ and remains the same. It is a secondary that you cannot select if you have any psychers in your army, because of course this means that you hate psychers and you're trying to kill them. And assuming that you meet that requirement, you get 2 points for killing every enemy psyker unit that's not a character, and you get 3 points for killing every enemy unit that is a character. A nice balance between not being too punishing for psychic armies, although I still personally think some of them do suffer a bit, and also not making it impossible. So this has remained the same as we've been playing these last few months. Warp Ritual, which was previously Psychic Ritual, once again sees this paradigm of gradual points gaining and not being so punishing if you're only able to complete a secondary halfway through. So the way this works now is, rather than having to complete a Psychic Ritual 3 times with the same character in the middle of the board, they've made it much easier. You do have to complete the ritual 3 times if you want to max it out. You do have to still do it in the middle of the board. And the warp charge, I believe, remains the same. So the way this works now, though, is you get a tally each time you complete this ritual to a max of 3. If you have 1 tally point by the end of the game, you're going to be looking at 3 victory points. If you have 2 tallies at the end of the game, you're going to be getting 7 victory points. And if you have 3 tallies by the end of the game, you're going to be getting 12 victory points. Now, I will say Psychic Ritual before would grant 15 flat out by just completing those 3, so there are cases where this obviously will be worse. But I will say one other change to this is it does not appear to require you to have done all 3 of these casts with the same Psyker. It becomes very, very interesting for some of these Psychic-based armies that can be kind of adjusting their playstyle, moving around, and not being so afraid of losing a single model that just knocks out an entire secondary category. That always kind of felt very strange to me. Whenever we have played Psychic Ritual on the channel, it has either been a 15 or we just don't take it, right? That's pretty much always how it goes. So I'm hoping this one will see more play in a more realistic fashion, where it's not just when you're either taking it because it's guaranteed or you're not taking it at all. Pierce the Veil remains a very difficult secondary to complete. It is still a psychic action within 6 of the opponent's board edge and more than 6 inches from enemy units. If you've completed this action twice, you're going to be getting 8 victory points, and if you complete it 4 times, you're going to be getting 15 victory points. And yes, there's no difference between completing it 2 times or 3 times. It's either 2 or 4, and can get max points. But again, this is a really, really difficult secondary to score, and kind of surprised we didn't see some big changes to this one. Next up, we have the last secondary, which is called Psychic Interrogation, formerly known as Mental Interrogation. The only change for this one appears to be the fact that when you perform this psychic action that interrogates an enemy character within 24 inches, they have to be visible. Now, this was already kind of a utility pick that meant you had to have a psyker that you were willing to not use because you have to fly around, be within 24 of a enemy character, and you perform this action, right? And it would give you 3 victory points each time. Now, of course, they can't be visible. It is a 24-inch range, but I think it might be a little too easy to prevent. Again, this is something that we'll kind of see with time, and maybe certain armies will be obviously better equipped to deal with this, but often it was support characters, in my opinion, that were getting mentally interrogated, and those support characters could easily be out of line of sight and just be giving out their buffs and auras within their range. So we'll see about this one. And that concludes the changes to the secondaries in the Grand Tournament 2021 pack from Games Workshop. Really excited for these secondaries. I think overall these are all in a great direction. It's making them much less punishing, which I think people will appreciate. And it also just kind of helps improve the game. A couple little small tweaks in there. Nothing too big though, as you'll notice. So hopefully this has been helpful, both as someone who might be coming to see the changes to the secondaries, or maybe you're just someone who wants to see what these secondaries are about and how this works in the Grand Tournament Pack 2021. Either way, if you did enjoy this video, do like and subscribe, as it does help us continue to grow the channel and create more content for you guys. Additionally, if you want to support the channel even more, you could hit the join button down below, become a member, check out our special exclusive games every single Tuesday, which you guys actually get to vote on. I'm really excited to be playing these rules. Thank you so much. I'll catch you next time on the tabletop.